So to everyone here, this event is hosted by the AIxDesign Community. We're constantly exploring the intersection of AI and design. And today we have Sofie here, who's a part of the core team of the AI company Sana Labs. And over the last year, she has headed the global marketing activities and expanded their international footprint from brand positioning to global AI summits and lead generation, bringing benefits of AI in learning to tens and thousands of individuals across the globe. She's now responsible for business development, helping organizations in various industries leverage AI in learning. And she's also leading the Swedish chapter of the nonprofit organization called Women in AI, helping girls and women understand and deeply apply AI, decreasing the gender gap in the AI field. Today, she's actually going to talk about the impact of design on human decision-making in AI systems. So without any further ado, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much for that warm and kind introduction. It's great to be here today, and thank you so much for having me. I'll get started straight away. And as Avantika just said, today I'm going to speak about the impact of design on human decision-making in AI systems. But to start with just another brief introduction of myself, team at Sana Labs, as just mentioned. And for those of you who don't know Sana Labs from before, you will know us much better after this session. My role at Sana Labs has always been on the commercial side of things, although I have a degree in engineering, and I will give this presentation today from my perspective in the company, being on that commercial side. We're heavily focused on AI or machine learning, as well as design, although I myself am not responsible for developing neither ML functionalities or the design itself, just so that I can set that expectation before we dive into today's session. And on the side of Sana Labs, as Avantika just said, I'm also responsible for leading the chapter in Sweden for the non-women AI. And they're really working to decrease the gender gap in the AI field. So if you're curious about discussing that with me as well, I'll be more than happy to grab a coffee, physical or virtual. And if we look back at Sana Labs and what we stand for, we really believe that everything starts with learning. And by improving the way that the world learns, we can improve the world. So I wanted to ask you today to share, how do you best learn? Either we can use the Menti link that I have, or feel free to write in the chat as well. I'm thinking since we're only 8 participants so far, or speak up. I'm more than happy for this to be really interactive as well. Pardon?
How do you learn best?
Yeah, how do you learn best? So learning by doing, I see all of that. Exactly, by making mistakes. I personally also really learn by teaching others. I think that's the best way of understanding whether I actually have understood something or not. Super, but I think this is great. So I really want this to be an interactive session where I'd love for you to ask a lot of questions and really get involved in the discussion as well. So I will point some of these questions for you that we then can enter either in the chat or through Menti, but feel free to keep the chat active as well. But thank you so much for sharing. And I think a lot of us really learn by doing, and then the question of that is okay, but how do we do it and what do we do? And at Sana, we really have the vision of bringing personalized learning for everyone, everywhere. And I think this goes along to meeting my individual needs and what I really need at this point in time. And at Sana Labs, we've developed an adaptive and personalized learning platform that we've built on 3 core principles, where the first is that everything we do is rooted in learning science. So insights that come from the field of cognitive science or learning science that can help optimize how people learn. That's something that we incorporate to our algorithms. Secondly, this is enhanced by AI or machine learning. So we want to make sure to use the latest breakthroughs in machine learning to tailor this learning experience to the individual's needs. Third, and lastly, we're looking at world-leading design, meaning that we want to create learning experiences that are intuitive, inspiring, and delightful. So what we're looking to do is really to create a consumer experience in an enterprise product, making it fun to use and fun to learn. And something that we're asking ourselves every day, which the great mathematician Richard Hamming also did, is what is the most important problem in your field? And this is for you to understand and for us to take a step back to understand what problems can we really solve with AI or machine learning with learning. And if we look at the learning field, then some of the most important problems that users are demanding is being able to make the time to learn, the left-hand side here, and also aligning the learning to their skill gaps. What do they actually need to learn that are related to their role? And these are just two of the problems that we're solving. We're solving many other problems, such as being able how to assess knowledge or moving away from this personalized to one-size-fits-all experience. We want to be able to match the skill gaps to the individual's need in order to make this personalized and just when they need it or in the flow of work is another common work. Organizations are also seeing challenges with learning being disengaging. It can also be quite a big hassle to administrate and create this content that we all have to learn. So we want to help organizations make this transparent to be able to identify the skills across the organization. And we've divided all of these problems or challenges into ML-based problems, where we're mostly using machine learning to solve these problems, as well as design or user experience problems, where in the ML problems, machine learning works heavier in order to solve this particular problem, whereas in the other UX cases, design works more heavily to solve this problem. But of course, they have to interact and be used well together, because when they are used well together, we can get a really powerful user experience. And what we want to make sure with design when developing these ML features is to avoid a local minimum. What I mean by that is that we want to have large deltas in design, meaning that each time we design something, we want there to be a big difference between the design A and design B. Because if we have smaller deltas in the design, that probably means that we are optimizing for local maximum, something that we think is the best of the market right now, but it's actually just the best from what we see in this short time horizon, for instance. And what we want to make sure is to optimize for the global maximum, which is the end of this curve, which has much higher potential than just the local one. And to do that, to optimize for the global maximum, we really need to have big deltas in design. And this is something that we're doing at Sana Labs, where we're making very big changes each time that we're iterating on the design. Because if we see that the changes are too small, we're probably not thinking big enough about it. And we're doing this based on a 6-year, 6-month, and 6-week cycle, where we have a 6-year more long-term strategy or vision, more to call it. And we set up every 6 months where we gather the entire company, we gather data and insights, and we place our bets and beliefs in order to set this next 6-month strategy. We then break this down into something we call hexads, which are 6 weeks timelines for when we make a very detailed plan for what the design and product development will happen during these 6 weeks. But if you want to learn more about Sana Labs and in general what we do, I'd encourage you to go to sanalabs.com or reach out to any one of us in the team to learn more about it. And I'm just going to make sure to check the chat here as well. Where learning by repetition was one way of learning. I think that's a super interesting aspect as well. As I'm sure you all know, when we're perhaps taught in school or at university, you were taught to repeat something that you had just learned in your lecture. You repeated it after the lecture, you repeated it in the evening, you repeated a week after, and repeated a month after, and so forth. And ultimately, you're going to remember this for an infinite period of time. And in the learning science, this is something called spaced repetition, which is something that we actually have incorporated to the Sana product. But I'm not going to speak any more about Sana. Please feel free to ask any questions either in the chat or just unmute yourselves, and I'll be happy to dive deeper into that. But I hope this makes sense so far. Please go ahead. Do we have any questions? Okay, if not, feel free to shoot them over in the chat and we'll continue. So I want to take a step back to look at where we all started. Obviously, we didn't have this 6 years ago. So if we look at where we started, Sana Labs actually started out as an AI as a service company where we provided a recommendation system to existing learning companies that had already built learning platforms. So we integrated our recommendation technology through APIs to already existing learning platforms where we were in charge of the technology. But what we learned from this was that we weren't in control of the design, since the user experience was owned and built by someone else. It was already built by the company that we were partnering up with, the learning platform, which really created a black box for learners, because the recommendations that were so smart didn't feel so smart for the learner because of the UI. And sorry, I'm mixing between the slide and Zoom. That's why we're hearing this noise. And what we learned from this was that the learning experience really needed to be explainable. We needed to remove this black box and help the learner understand what's happening beneath to make them feel like they're in control. And this is also around making the user experience predictable so that what you expect to happen actually happens. And this is also around making it smart. We still want to have the learner feeling that this is a smart experience, providing these smart and personalized recommendations. And of course, it has to be easy to use. So again, making sure that when you click somewhere, it actually happens what you think is going to happen, which is probably 101 of user experience. And from this, we have come down to some product principles based on these learnings that we're still using today. And those are around mastering the fundamentals, mastering the basics. We also don't want to make the user think as they're going through a learning experience. We want to make our experience rewarding so that the user really feels like they want to continue to do this and continue to learn. We also make bold bets where it counts, going back to our vision and making sure that we really can differentiate and be bold and think about the grand picture of personalized learning. And what we want to get at is this virtual cycle of events to make sure that one event results in a big increase in the next one and so forth. And I'm sure that some of you perhaps are familiar with this virtual cycle of events. And now I'm going to pose a question again. Does anyone know where this picture comes from, this company? I'll give you a clue, and it starts on A. but it's from Amazon, and they're widely using this to improve the customer experience. They'll therefore get more traffic, they'll increase the sell, and so forth, and get the growth of the company. And this is really what we're doing with our personalized learning platform, Sana, as well. We want to help our administrators and learners create more lessons and courses so that we can get more curated data and therefore build better machine learning tools. And lastly, decrease the barriers to create these lessons and courses and so forth. So that becomes a virtual cycle of events. And if we look at how developing machine learning products or machine learning features, it actually differentiates somewhat from developing standard or other types of features. So if we look at the standard process, that's typically divided into 4 steps around ideating and prototyping. We want to align and define, then build and test, and lastly, measure and learn. Whereas, and this is the process that we're using for our so-called perhaps non-ML based features. Whereas the ML feature based process requires validation to make sure that value can be created with the data that exists in the beginning. And all of this can be done before we go into the extensive design work. And in this early stage, we might actually find alternative ways of building this feature, and we therefore have to remake the design. So we therefore spend a lot more time around building a POC, generating data, validating and refining this before we go into the last 3 steps. And with an ML feature, it's also a lot of maintenance that comes with this, since we're continuously gathering more data that can be used to improve this feature, which we want to make sure is done. So this is how we're working with developing ML features at Sana Labs. And I wanted to give you a few hands-on tips for how we can do this in practice. And some of the guidelines that we are thinking around is always data first. So do we have a high enough quality data set? Because if we don't, there's no point in developing a machine learning feature of this. Let's stick to something that's based on heuristics and gather the data until we have that and can develop an ML feature that outperforms the one based on heuristics. Secondly, make sure to establish immediate value. So ML features are costly to build and maintain, and this wow effect has to stay with the user beyond just the first time they're seeing the product. It should stay with them for every time they're using the product. And a good check to do this is to ask whether another human would be able to do this task for the user. And if this task can help the user to get their job done faster, more accurately, or with less friction, then it's a go. Thirdly, you want to build trust over time, because as we know, machine learning systems might sometimes get it wrong. So we want to make sure to handle a scenario when the user comes off this happy path. And to become even more concrete, we've jotted down some do's and don'ts for this when designing with machine learning, so or designing machine learning features. So don't assume that the algorithms are flawless, because usually they aren't. So set the expectation with the user, meaning, for instance, if something isn't 100% based on the algorithm, it might be 75% certain of something. Portray this then in the user experience instead of stating that something is definite. So in learning, this, for instance, may be correct or incorrect, whereas instead we say, great job. Yeah.
I need to start utilizing my time better, truly.
Sorry, I'm not sure if we have a question or if... Yeah, perhaps it was just someone off mute, but please feel free to interrupt me with questions.
I had a question.
There's a question in the chat.
Yeah, I can ask it. In one of your first slides, you were saying that you know, one of your principles is making AI more transparent. I was curious about in your graph for the ML feature process, kind of where, kind of which part was really responsible for kind of in your design process for making the AI more transparent, or is that kind of a principle that you consider in the entire process?
Yeah, super good question, Boris. Thank you so much for bringing it up verbally. So I would say transparency is one of the things that we want to lead with when we're building a learning product based on machine learning. So this is something that we saw quite early on, that the learner needs to understand what's happening. So I would say the way in which we test this is really through user feedback and constantly iterating to make sure, are we transparent enough? But then I'm coming to that in 4 don'ts, that we shouldn't also always assume that all learners want to know exactly everything about what's going on. I mean, most people just want to use your product and use it because it enhances their lives. So in that way, we want to make sure to make learning readily available. So we might, for instance, post a blog post about it, where the ones interested can read up on how we're making this transparent, whereas the ones who are just interested in getting their lives more efficient but aren't interested in the technology behind it, then we don't have it as a feature or information in the product or anything like that. I hope that answers your question. And this also brings me to the last do and don't in this slide as well.
Thanks.
Super, thanks. And some other concrete practices in designing user experiences with ML is to not take all the control away from the user, because there might be instances where the user want to be in control. An example of this in Sana is, for instance, that we're helping users to generate questions as they're creating a course. And here we want to make sure that the user is in control, so the user can always edit and approve the question. It's never replacing the work that the human would do. And you should also not build flows that break with bad results, meaning have a safe fail. If the machine learning is to break, you want to make sure that when it does, it doesn't show up an error or something like that, but that you've also thought about that in the design for what happens then. But I want to come back to our question from where we started at today. How does design in AI-powered systems affect human decision-making? And here I want to go to the human aspect of this question and around the decision-making part of it. So if we look at that, I again want to pose a question to you, which is, how many decisions do you think that we actually make in a day? And here, let's see, let's post it in the chat instead of on Menti. And forgive me for not being taking privacy into consideration of this. But I hope you're all okay with this in this closed forum. 100,000, too many. That's a very good answer. I feel exactly the same way. Is it possible to count? That's a very good question. And I think that's something that we all can agree on, that it is super difficult to count. We also need to agree on a definition of decisions. What does it mean to take a decision? Is that the decision for you to continue being here? Is that the decision for me choosing my next phrase as I'm speaking now? What's the decision? So I think it's it's pretty difficult to define, and let's think of it as an hypothetical question with an estimation. But I think the guess of 100,000 was really, really good. I've read that it's 35,000 decisions per day. Those probably small from, or big from small decisions as well. But if we take away the hours that we sleep in a day, this makes us take 2,000 decisions per hour. Breaking this down further, meaning that we take a decision in every 2 seconds. So I think when we're speaking around decisions like this, it's definitely the small decisions that are included in terms of me choosing to make a hand movement or stop speaking or something like that. But like you post in the chat as well, we're overwhelmed with decisions, and we have way.
Good. Any practice?
Pardon? Did you have a question, Van? Okay, I'll continue. Unless there's one in the chat, I'll check here. But we're overwhelmed with decisions, and what I think that we can do, or one as a UX designer, is to help in this decision making. And that's why we talk about persuasive design, because this can actually ease the decision making and improve the user experience when making all of these decisions. So when we speak about persuasive design, we might perhaps want to define what this is. And persuasive design is essentially a strategy that can make the user focus their attention and effort toward a particular topic and limit their actions into something specific. And the phrase persuasive design was first used in academia and coined in 1996 by someone called B.J. Fogg. I'm not sure if you've heard of him. He now has a lot of TED Talks talking about tiny habits and how you can make behavioral changes based on small changes in your everyday life. So the word persuasive design, or the word captology, which is the study of computers as persuasive designs, comes from the acronym of this. And another person that I'd highly recommend for you to look up is Gustav Borgefalk, also based here in Sweden, or he's from Sweden at least, doing a lot of research on captology. So I'd highly recommend checking out his work if you want to dive deeper into the academia of this aspect. And as we're speaking about persuasive design, there's of course a fine line between persuasive design and deceptive design, where persuasive design is really using the fine art of persuasion to create something that's compelling. And we want to help the user to focus their attention on one thing and help them in limiting their actions, which will then ease decision making. Whereas deceptive design, that's built on dark patterns, and we're intentionally trying to trick users if we're using deceptive design. So this might, for instance, be allowing the user to take an action without having full awareness, which can, for instance, be hidden costs or disguised ads. It can be a trick question to sign up on something, etc. And we, of course, want to avoid deceptive design and focus on persuasive design, which is then a positive manner of using this in design. And to think about this again, how we can think around the positive effect of this is really by using the golden rule of persuasion, which is like any golden rule in the world. You should behave to others like you want others to treat yourself. And just like in persuasion, the creators of persuasive technology should never seek to persuade someone of something they themselves would not want to be persuaded. So this is something that I believe we all should take with us as we're using persuasive technologies. And I wanted to share a few design principles of how we can use persuasive design in practice. And these are around framing, reciprocity, scarcity, social proof, authority, and salience, which I'm now going to go through one by one before we wrap this session up. So the idea of this is to make it a bit more hands-on and provide some recommendations for how at least we are thinking about persuasive design at Sana Labs. So let's start with the first one around framing, where the persuasive design principle of framing compares different options in an appealing way. So this can be putting examples next to each other to clearly show me and highlighting that I should go with the right option instead of the left. A lot of companies are, of course, using this in practice in regards to pricing, where an example from Mentimeter here is clearly recommending me that I should upgrade to the Pro plan from my current free plan. And it's giving me clear alternatives and highlighting the one that I should go with now. The second one is around reciprocity and is the principle of returning the favor. So once that you're given something or someone does something nice to you, you typically feel that you want to return the favor of giving something back. And this is also relevant for companies. And a company which is doing this really well, in my opinion, is Duolingo. So with Duolingo, you can start free, you can learn a new language and really make use of their tool. However, you of course feel that you want to return the favor. So the idea is that you will sign up and move from a freemium account to start paying for other features. The third principle is scarcity, stating that the less of something there is, the more valuable it becomes. And I think we have all experienced this. Once we're booking flights or hotels, we can really feel the sense of urgency and almost become stressed because we feel that we have to book something now because it's running out, or the seats are running out, or the price is limited, and so forth. And this is done in various ways, everything from this is from hotels.com, where I'm looking to book a trip and it said book now to get this fantastic price. Of course, it's trying to create urgency for me to book this now, otherwise the price might go up. And I often feel that when I'm on hotels.com or any other hotel site, I always get a little pop-up saying, someone else booked this room within the last 24 hours or something like that. So creating a lot of urgency and the feeling of scarcity that this is running out. So I have to get to my spot before they run out. The fourth principle in this is social proof. And social proof is the idea that people will usually do what they see others doing and go based on recommendations, or they'll wait until they see that others are doing it before they actually initiate it and do it themselves. And this can be anything from providing recommendations to working with, for instance, case studies. And I think every single company that I see is working with either inspiration libraries or customer case studies, where I think Algolia has done this in a really good way of that inspiration library, where you can go and search in a library and see every single company or use case that they've been working on in order to see how this can be applied for my own use case. And of course, this can be at an individual level as well, with individuals providing recommendations. And I see perhaps that my friends are going to this event and therefore I'll also go. Authority. Authority really illustrates that people look to experts and trusted sources for information before they make a decision. And one of my favorite examples, and also taking from the learning industry, is from Masterclass, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Masterclass or not, but please go to masterclass.com. This is not an ad, because they have really engaging learning experiences, although being based on video solely. And I believe this really is because of the authority principle, because you're learning from the world's best. So for instance, if I want to learn how to cook better, I'll directly be taught by Gordon Ramsay. Or if I want to learn about acting, I'll be taught by the world's best actress, and so forth. And this is a pretty powerful effect. Going to salience, the salience principle shows that people pay attention to what's most important to them at the moment. And I think we can see this across various interfaces where we can see colors competing with each other. We can see call to actions or buttons competing with each other. And one company that has taken this to the very extreme, I think, but is doing it greatly so and allowing us as users to focus on one single thing is, of course, Google and its search, where it's very clear. Once we go to google.com, there's one clear action for us to do, and that's to search and navigate around the world's information. I hope that this has been useful for you and that you have a bit of greater insight to how we're working with the ML features and design at Sana Labs, as well as that I've given you some concrete tips on how we can work with this in practice as well. So to round up, as we're thinking about persuasion or captology, we have to think about this in a positive manner and really use it to help users and improve the user experience, to improve or simplify the decision making out of these 35,000 decisions that we're taking each day. Another thing is that it's great to understand human behavior in decision making, because we can then really help how people are interacting with the technologies that we are building for them. Thirdly, we of course have to use this in an ethical way. We have to think about the golden rule and use persuasive design and technologies in the way in which we wish to be persuaded as we're using someone else's design or technology. But when used ethically, persuasive design is a really powerful tool that can help people make better decisions. Thank you so much for tuning in to this session, and please connect with me on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest way to get a hold of me, or shoot me an email at sofie@sanalabs.com. But I want to open the floor up to questions now, and I can see we have some in the chat here as well. Yes, we'd all like to cook, learn how to cook. Have you tried some way to predict the user intention to be one step ahead on salience? That's also a really good question. I think the most common way in which we're testing this is probably through user interviews and user testing. Of course, we're looking at the data collected as well to see, but we need to think about, okay, what was their intention? We might not know that, but we'll definitely understand if a user gets frustrated because something that was not intended happened. I'm not sure if this answers your question, Helen. Feel free to expand on your question if you wish.
I think user interviews is a good way to know more about the user intentions. My question is more about how to make, considering in a product the user could have many intentions. With, for example, in Spotify, I could use the app at the morning to listen very beaty song to work out, and at night I want a playlist to sleep, for instance. I have two intentions. How can I predict the user intention to be?
Yeah. But this we're learning from data, right? So perhaps, and I think again, going back to the principle around let's use heuristics where we can. And in learning, this can, for instance, be if we know that in our case, then a learner is just starting off learning experience. We want to start by testing their knowledge. We then know that we want to present the questions to them based on heuristics in a difficulty manner that we have decided, meaning that it's not based on machine learning, but rather on data, because there's no point in providing this at random. So I think it probably goes back to that intention for where we probably know, and we know the rule as humans better. We'll use heuristics and base this then on the data to create the ML-based experiences where it's relevant.
Oh, makes sense.
Another question in the chat. Once users realize that they are dealing with ML systems, do you find that they adjust their behavior? No, I wouldn't say so. And also they know this in advance. So whenever someone starts using Sana, we're always very clear on that we're working with the personalized learning powered by AI, but the AI can be anywhere from search, for instance, so where we're using natural language processing to simplify finding information, so that co-workers or learners can just ask a question to Sana that analyzes the content in this particular organization to then provide a summarized answer for them. Or as a content creator, you would also know when you're using an ML-based feature or not. So we typically call them smart features when they're ML-based versus when they're not. I hope that answers your question, of course.
I guess I'd be surprised, right, if when somebody interacts with an ML system, if they use it, they might gain trust in the system and might modify their inputs, or give more inputs in order to get better recommendations or something like that. I'd be surprised if they don't adjust their behavior at all, right? It's
okay. Yeah, I see where you're coming from. So take, for instance, in our create experience where people create content. Here, the question generation feature, for instance, or generator feature, there definitely people try it out over and over again because they know that it's going to provide a new recommendation for them. So yes, in that sense. But how I interpreted the question was that when they find out that it's based on ML, they already know this from the beginning. So there's no point in which they think it's not based on ML, and that then changes. So I would say that yes, when there's an ML feature, they of course act differently to if this feature was not based on ML. That would be my assumption as well. So I agree with you for sure.
Yeah, it's really like one of the challenges, right? When people start interacting, they modify their behavior, and kind of it's the Facebook algorithm consequence, where the end results are not what was probably intended by the original designers.
Yeah,
that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, I agree for sure.
Quick question. I have a few quick questions. One, is it right to assume that your primary user that you design for is the creator, so the lesson maker, going through like your examples and through this, the lens of primary user was the lesson maker? Is that correct?
Yeah, no, it's a super good question. So I didn't want to focus this session too much on our product, but the product that we've built is a learning platform that contains a creation tool. So that's the creation tool that I've been speaking about, where you go to create learning content. You could also be a team leader or a manager to administrate learning. And then it's the learner itself. So that might be an employee or anyone logging in to learn on the Sana platform. So it's essentially for three types of users.
The reason that I ask is because I know I'm digging into product questions, but it has a relationship to design, both in product and also business design. So my question is, how do you balance the trade-offs between those three different users? So specifically, when the question popped up was when you're talking about giving the creator insights into how the learners were interacting with the content. Now, you know, folks learn in different ways, as you mentioned at the beginning of the talk, but they also learn in like culturally competent ways. So like, you know, certain groups learn in similar ways or have a different relationship to teachers or an authority. And also there's ability factor. So if a course creator was getting insights about how their content was doing or the way that they were positioning their content was doing with learners, does it take into consideration these different axes of ability or culture that are nuanced beyond what you can find through the data? Failure might be really different for someone who's like English as second language in a company versus English as first, someone who is educated in a private schooling system versus someone who is educated in a public schooling system. I'm just wondering how these types of nuances come into play.
Yeah, it's a super good question, and we don't take any of that data into account because the only data that we collect from the learner is the interaction data. So that's the only thing that we can base it on. So currently we don't want to gather any personal data about the learner. If that makes sense. And then I'm sure that there are pros and cons for evaluating that and basing it on the rules that we know about how people learn. But I think it's also different to generalize this.
Yeah, totally. I think, you know, taking a no data collection approach does open up risk to creating a colorblind success system, right? That doesn't acknowledge the different ways that success might look like for different types of people that would come up through either the collection of or inferring of special category data or personal data. And so, yeah, it's interesting to know that you've proactively decided not to do that type of intersectional analysis of people beyond the
it's a
product
super,
use.
super interesting point, because the reason for us not doing this is because of privacy, because we want to protect the privacy of the user, and that's really priority one. But then I assume based on what you're saying as well, is probably that it might make sense to do some user testing on this in a controlled manner, and I think that would probably be the way to go.
Build on that. Has there ever been any times in which your product incentives or something that's an outcome of your design principles has come at odds with your revenue incentives or revenue targets? Because so often I find, especially when you're talking about ethical design or product creation, whether it's AI, ML or not, sometimes it can come at odds with revenue generation or customer acquisition. Has there ever been a time in the company in which the design principles have been put to bed for a commercial interest?
No, I wouldn't say so. So much of our sales is B2B. The sales cycles are therefore quite long, and there's always a human involved in this. So it's a lot of human interaction within these large enterprise negotiations before someone starts using a product. So I think this is pretty different from if it were to be a consumer product. Super, thank you so much. Really good questions.
I do have one last question for you. So BJ Fogg is primarily known for his work in behavior design. So how different is persuasive design from behavior design?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's probably a question for him and not for me. Yeah, no, it's a super good question. I think when I read up on BJ Fogg, obviously I don't know much about his work other than just small things that I've read. And in my understanding, he shifted focus from trying to understand how technology influences behavior to just moving over into general human behavior. So I guess it's the input of this behavior and the external factors affecting it, where technology can be one of them, and that's what he focused on first. And now it's overall behavior or human behavior.
Because like when you like showed the principles, there's so much connect between that and behavior design. So it just got me thinking like, so it's behavior design a product of persuasive design, or the other way around? Because I can see how they can be connected, but also different at the same time. So just trying to see if there's what's the deciding factor as well, you know?
Yeah, no, I don't.
Don't worry about it.
So you'll have to invite PJ Fogg for this one.
No worries. But does anyone else have any other questions? If not, I think we can wrap this up. Thank you so much, Sofie. This has been such an insightful talk. Like I learned so much from this conversation. And
I do have one question.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. There you go.
Yeah, very sorry to just interrupt you when you were about to wrap up, but I just felt it was a lot better to listen, because this is more like learning for me rather than just trying to talk. So this is more along the lines of curiosity, and from what you said, and I don't want to focus too much on Sana, your lovely product, but I am a bit curious as to basically which pillars of learning do you sort of feel ML is more useful for. And a quick example would be maybe to give an example with a product like I think called Descript, and it lets you, I suppose, make edits like to like an audio kind of using your voice, and it's quite simple to use. So like with your product precisely and how it works, which bits with regards to learning have you found ML to be more useful in? An example you gave was sort of like people asking questions and then using NLP to get the answers really quickly.
Yeah, so if I'm understanding your question correctly, it's around in which aspects we found ML to be more useful than in others.
Yeah, with regards to learning, you gave an example. It's useful when it comes to asking questions.
Yeah, no, it's a super good question. I think this is really what we're continuing to explore every day, where the ones that we've found so far is some of the challenges that I listed, for instance, around providing learning just when you need it. So here we can see that search, for instance, based on natural language processing, is a much easier way of finding information. So it's essentially searching for something like you would on Google, but it's specific for all the internal company assets that you have in the organization. So that's solving the problem of just-in-time learning, since people don't have time to learn, for instance. So those are the type of things that we're looking at today. The other one is around their personalization aspect, around recommending content to the right user at just the right point in time, allowing them to focus on their individual knowledge level so that they don't focus on what's too difficult or what's too easy, but they stay at their optimal level of difficulty, meaning that their engagement increases and they just enjoy learning a lot more, is what we see from at least our net promoter scores. But this is what we're exploring. So I'm more than happy if you have any ideas, please share them with me, because this is really what we're working on in our day-to-day at Sana Labs.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Awesome. I think that was the last question. Well, then thank you so much once again, Sofie. And for everyone else, if you have any questions, you know how to connect with her on LinkedIn or talk to her and find out more about Sana Labs. There will be a recording of this that will be shared with everyone, and it's going to be on YouTube. You're going to get a follow-up email from me regarding all the details. So thank you so much for tuning in today. So yeah, that's all.
Sure. Thank you all so much. Thanks for having me.